The roll was Kodak Kodachrome 64, sealed since 1971, and the image came up slowly, the way old film always does. Shapes first, then edges, then detail resolving out of amber chemical darkness into something recognizable. The conservator in Portland had worked with degraded archival film for 20 years, and she understood the patience it required. She had expected very little. The odds that anything had survived 5 decades of slow chemical decay were low enough that she had said so, plainly, before she accepted the commission. What she had not expected was this: a face. In the background of a field photograph, partially obscured by a rock formation in the left foreground, a man stood looking toward the camera. He had not posed. He did not know he was there. He was simply a man who had been in the wrong place at the wrong moment, caught by a lens belonging to a woman who photographed everything she found worth recording. And for 52 years, that image had been sealed in an envelope in a climate-controlled storage facility in Boise, Idaho, waiting for someone to look. Detective Sergeant Ruth Alvarez of the Idaho State Police Cold Case Unit was sitting in her office in Boise on a Tuesday afternoon in November 2022 when her phone rang and the conservator told her what she was looking at. Alvarez set down her coffee. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How many frames?" Three frames with a face that could be worked with. 3 frames that had been sitting, sealed and undisturbed, in an evidence envelope for 52 years, logged as presumed blank, never opened, never seen. What happened in the summer of 1971 in the Clearwater National Forest, and what was done to Maren Elise Kowalski, had waited 52 years for that phone call. But to understand what those 3 frames meant, you first have to understand who Maren was and what she was doing in those mountains. In the summer of 1971, the Clearwater National Forest in north-central Idaho was the kind of wilderness that a certain kind of young person sought out deliberately. Dense conifer country, river valleys carved deep into basalt, the kind of landscape where you could hike for 2 days without crossing a paved road. The forest smelled of pine resin and cold water. Summer afternoons came in fast with thunderstorms that blew through and left the air washed clean and the ground steaming in the heat that followed. The nearest town of consequence was Orofino, a logging and mining community of about 3,500 people along the Clearwater River, where the radio still played country and the diner opened at 5 in the morning for the men who worked the early shifts. In the summer of 1971, the war in Vietnam was in its 10th year, and the draft lottery numbers were being traded between young men in the same tones their fathers had once traded crop prices. Nixon was in the White House. An 8-track tape of Merle Haggard was the kind of thing you found on the bench seat of every pickup in Orofino. The field crews working the backcountry did their navigation with USG's topographic maps, paper ones, folded and refolded until the crease lines cut through the contour lines and you had to guess at the elevation. There was no GPS. There were no cell phones. There was a 2-way radio at the base camp and a schedule of check-ins, and when someone was late, you drove out and looked for them yourself. It was a place that operated on familiar terms. The people who lived there had known each other for years. And strangers were noticed the way strangers are noticed in small places, not with hostility, but with a quiet attentiveness that missed very little. Maren Elise Kowalski was 24 years old that summer. She was a field assistant with the University of Idaho Geology Department, working a summer survey contract in the Clearwater backcountry, mapping rock formations along 3 designated survey corridors, collecting core samples, logging her findings in the careful shorthand her supervisor had taught her to use. She had grown up in Coeur d'Alene, the eldest daughter of Irina Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who had come to Idaho in 1952 with 2 suitcases and a seamstress's skill that she parlayed into a steady living hemming trousers and letting out wedding dresses for every family in a 10-block radius. Irina was a precise and devoted woman who had raised Marin to be both independent and careful, and who called the field station number every Sunday evening to hear her daughter's voice. Marin had been accepted to a graduate geology program at the Colorado School of Mines starting in the fall. She had written to Irina about it in June, a long letter, the kind Marin wrote when something felt important enough to commit to paper, and Irina had read it 3 times and then put it in the small cedar box where she kept the things she wanted to keep. Marin had said she would be home by August. She had said to tell the neighbors she'd be back in time for the parish picnic. She had said she was working hard and sleeping well, and that the mountains were unlike anything she had seen. She carried a 35mm Minolta camera everywhere she went in the field. It was her second journal, she said. She photographed everything she found interesting: rock faces and stream bends and wildflowers growing from cracks in granite, and she developed the rolls herself in the university darkroom when she returned from survey trips. Her supervisor, Dr. Carl Bleeker, would say later that you could follow Marin's thinking through her photographs the same way you could follow it through her field notes. She noticed things. She was the kind of scientist who understood that the thing you documented today might be the thing that explains something else entirely later, and so she documented everything. On the morning of July 19, 1971, Marin left the base camp at the Brushy Fork trailhead alone, which was not unusual. She was surveying a 2-mile corridor she had already partially mapped the previous week, and she knew the terrain. She signed the camp log at 7:14 a.m. and noted her intended return time as 3 p.m. She had her pack, her sample kit, her field notebook, and her camera. A second geologist on the team, a graduate student named Tom Briggs, watched her head up the trail and then turned back to his own work. He thought nothing of it. She always came back. By 4 o'clock, she had not returned. By 5, Tom had started up the trail himself to look for her. By 6:30, he had found her field notebook on the ground off the trail, near a rock formation she had been documenting. The notebook was open to a half-completed entry. Beside it, her sample kit was open. 2 core samples still in the collection tray. Her water bottle was there. Her camera was not. She was not there. Tom Briggs ran back to camp. The call went out through the Clearwater County Sheriff's radio network at 7:02 p.m. A search began at dawn the following morning. Forest Service personnel, sheriff's deputies, and volunteers from Orofino covered the Brushy Fork corridor and the surrounding drainages for 4 days. On the 3rd day, in a ravine approximately 1.5 miles north of the point where the notebook had been found, Marin Kowalski was found. She had been killed. The camera was not recovered. In her jacket pocket, zipped closed, was a single unexposed film roll in its factory canister, a spare she had been carrying for when the roll in the camera ran out. The Clearwater County Sheriff's Office opened a homicide investigation immediately. Within the week, Idaho State Police were involved. The lead investigator was a state detective named Howard Marsh, and he had very little to work with. There were boot prints near the scene, several sets, from search volunteers who had moved through the area before the scene was properly secured. A failure of coordination that Marsh noted in his report with controlled frustration. There was trace physical evidence that was collected, preserved, and sent to the state lab, but the science of 1971 could do almost nothing with it. Hair samples could establish broad characteristics. Blood typing could eliminate, not identify. Fingerprinting required a surface and a suspect, and there was no surface and no clear suspect. The film canister found in Marin's pocket was logged into evidence and marked in the case file as unexposed, undeveloped, provenance unknown, notations that assumed, reasonably, that a spare roll sealed in its factory canister was blank. What no one logged, and what Howard Marsh could not have known, was that the roll in Marin's camera, the roll she had been shooting that day, with 22 frames already exposed, had been partially rewound by the camera's mechanism when the camera was taken. The roll had slid partially back into its canister. It was not the factory spare. It was the roll from the camera. Someone had taken a camera they did not understand and inadvertently preserved the evidence inside it. In early August, a Forest Service contractor turned in a Minolta camera found along a logging road 12 miles from the Brushy Fork trailhead. The camera was logged, examined for prints, none usable, and stored. The film inside was noted as partially rewound and placed in a separate evidence envelope marked undeveloped. The word written beside it in the evidence log was presumed, as in presumed damaged, presumed blank, presumed not worth the cost and effort of processing when a 1971 crime lab had other priorities. The roll sat in its envelope. The case moved forward without it. Howard Marsh worked the investigation for 18 months. He identified and eliminated 6 persons of interest. A seasonal worker with a prior assault conviction was interviewed 3 times and subjected to sustained investigative pressure. His timeline held, confirmed by employer records and a hunting companion who had been with him the entire week of July 19th. A transient who had been seen near Orofino in that period was located in Spokane in the fall. He had no vehicle and had not been in the Clearwater backcountry. Marsh pulled permit records, talked to every ranger and contractor who had worked those corridors that summer. He was thorough. He was persistent. He found no one he could charge. By the spring of 1973, the investigation had no momentum left. The file was not closed. Howard Marsh would not close it. But it was no longer being actively worked. The trace evidence from the scene sat in storage. The camera and the film envelope sat in storage. Marsh retired from Idaho State Police in 1981 without ever finding Marin Kowalski's killer. He told a colleague, the year before he retired, that the Kowalski case was the one he thought about when he woke up at 3 in the morning. Irina Kowalski wrote her first letter to the Idaho State Police in the fall of 1978. She was 53 years old, and her handwriting was careful and clear. The writing of a woman who had learned English as a second language and took its precision seriously. She wrote that she understood the department had limited resources. She wrote that she was not asking for anything impossible. She wrote that she would like to know if anything had changed. By 1985, she was writing twice a year. By 1990, her daughter Helena, Marin's younger sister, had moved back to Coeur d'Alene to help care for her, and Helena sometimes read the letters aloud to Irina before they were sent, because Irina's eyesight had begun to fail her. The letters went into the file. A detective wrote back when there was something to say, and when there wasn't, a form letter went out instead. The form letters were the ones that arrived most often. The University of Idaho Geology Department had changed its field protocols by 1974 in direct response to what had happened to Marin. Solo fieldwork was eliminated. The buddy system was formalized in the department handbook. Field assistants were required to check in by radio every 4 hours. Every incoming cohort of field students was told in orientation why these rules existed. For 20 years, students heard Marin Kowalski's name in that context, as a reason for a rule, as a lesson embedded in procedure. It was a form of remembering. It was not enough. By 1995, Irina was 70 years old, and the letters had slowed to once a year. By 2003, Irena Kowalski died at home in Coeur d'Alene at the age of 78. Helena found her in the morning. On the bedside table was the cedar box Irena had kept since before Maren disappeared, the one she'd always called the important box, and inside it, among the things she had kept over the years, was Maren's June 1971 letter about the Colorado School of Mines, the one she had read 3 times when it arrived, and then placed carefully inside. Helena kept writing to the Idaho State Police. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Maren. In 2019, the Idaho State Police Cold Case Unit assigned Detective Sergeant Ruth Alvarez to a review of 14 open homicide files from the 1960s and 1970s. Alvarez was 41, methodical in the way that cold case work requires, patient with documents, comfortable with the distance between suspicion and evidence, willing to sit with uncertainty without reaching. She had come to the cold case unit from financial crimes, a background that had given her a particular instinct for paper trails. She read the Kowalski file from the first page to the last, and then read it again, more slowly. The thing that stopped her on the second read was the evidence log from 1971. A Minolta camera, logged August 3rd, and beneath it, in different handwriting, one film roll, partially rewound, undeveloped, presumed. She sat with that word for a moment. Presumed, she found the camera in storage. The camera body was there. The evidence envelope was attached. The roll was inside the envelope, still sealed, still in its canister. In 52 years, no one had sent it to a lab. In 52 years, no one had revisited the presumption. Alvarez contacted the Idaho State Police Evidence Management Office and then placed a call to a film conservator in Portland named Dana Streit, who had been recommended by the Oregon State Archives as the leading specialist in degraded historical film in the Pacific Northwest. Alvarez explained what she had. Streit was quiet for a moment and then told her the honest probability. Kodachrome was among the most stable color films ever manufactured. If the roll had been stored sealed, in a stable environment, there was a real chance that something had survived. Not a certainty. A real chance. The roll was sent to Portland in December 2022. Dana Streit worked with it over the following 2 weeks, using an analog chemical development process calibrated for aged Kodachrome stock. She processed it carefully. She expected very little. What emerged in the chemical bath, frame by frame, was this: 22 images, 19 of them field photographs, rock faces, stream channels, a lichen-covered basalt formation photographed at close range. 3 images showed something else. In 2 of them, visible in the background behind a rock outcropping that Maren had been documenting, was a man. He was not posing. He was not looking directly at the lens. He was standing perhaps 40 feet away, partially screened by the rock, and his face was turned enough toward the camera that the image was, as Dana Streit reported to Detective Alvarez in her November phone call, clear. Clearly clear. Alvarez authorized facial reconstruction from the 2 best frames. A forensic imaging specialist in Boise produced an age-regressed composite, what the face in the 1971 images would have looked like in the mid-2020s. That composite was run through a genealogical DNA analysis process, working in parallel. Biological evidence recovered from the original 1971 scene, preserved in the State Evidence Archive for 5 decades, was uploaded to a public ancestry database. The process works by identifying partial DNA matches among people who have submitted their genetic profiles for family history research, and tracing those matches back to a common ancestor, then forward again to living relatives, to a specific family tree. The tree narrowed to a family in the Clearwater County area, a man named Gerald Lund. Records confirmed that Gerald Lund had been a seasonal Forest Service contractor working the Clearwater National Forest in the summer of 1971. He was 86 years old in 2023. He was living in a memory care facility in Boise. He had a son in Garden City and 2 grandchildren. He had, by every account available, lived a quiet life for 52 years. Investigators obtained a DNA sample through a welfare check at the facility, a coffee cup handled by Lund during the visit and lawfully collected afterward. The sample was compared against the biological evidence from 1971. It matched. The probability, as documented in the State Crime Lab report, was greater than 1 in 1 trillion. It was him, the man in Marin's photographs. The man who had taken her camera because he understood, in some animal way, that the camera had seen him. He had not known about the roll in her jacket pocket. The arrest of Gerald Lund took place on a Wednesday morning in March 2023. He was transported from the memory care facility by Idaho State Police investigators and a physician who accompanied the team given Lund's age and condition. He did not speak during transport. He was charged with first-degree murder. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Given Lund's age and documented cognitive decline, legal proceedings were complex and prolonged. In the fall of 2023, a district court judge accepted a guilty plea entered on Lund's behalf to a charge of second-degree murder and imposed a sentence of life in prison. He would not be eligible for release. Helena Kowalski, Marin's sister, 70 years old now, the woman who had continued their mother's letters for 2 decades after Irina could no longer write them herself, was present in the courtroom in Boise on the day the plea was entered. She sat in the front row of the gallery. She had brought the cedar box. She did not open it. She held it in her lap through the entire proceeding, and when the judge read the sentence into the record, she looked down at the box and was still for a long moment before she looked up again. There is a photograph of Marin Kowalski, taken by Tom Briggs, her fellow survey team member, in the weeks before she disappeared. It was taken at the Brushy Fork camp on a morning when the light was coming in sideways through the pines, and Marin is sitting on a camp stool with her field notebook open in her lap and her camera hanging from her neck by the strap, and she is laughing at something outside the frame. She is 24 years old. She is 3 weeks away from the Colorado School of Mines. She has Irina's letter-writing precision and Irina's belief that careful attention to the things that matter is the closest thing we have to justice. Gerald Lund had taken her camera because he believed it was the thing that connected him to what he had done. He was right about the camera. He was wrong about what was inside it. For 52 years, Marin Kowalski's own photographs, her documentation of what she found worth recording, her geological survey of a rock formation on a summer morning in Idaho, had been sealed in an envelope in a storage facility, waiting. She had photographed a killer without knowing it. She had preserved the evidence against him without meaning to. She had, in her precise and thorough way, done what she always did, documented everything. The film was the thing that justice needed. It just needed 52 years to be developed. What does it mean that the evidence in this case existed from the first day, sealed, intact, waiting, and was never examined? And here is what stays with me. How many other evidence boxes from the 1970s contain film canisters labeled presumed blank that have never been sent to a conservator because no one revisited the assumption? How many cases are waiting not for new technology, but for someone to look at what was already there and ask, what did we presume? Justice came for Maren Kowalski after 52 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.